Aufgabe. Ich kann nur sagen, die offizielle Story ist mit solchen Fehlern behaftet und kann so nicht gelaufen sein, dass eine andere Alternative in Frage kommt. Da spielt Demokratie und Rechtsstaat keine Rolle. Und genau diese Philosophie steckt dahinter und sie ist, wie gesagt, leider Gottes in Amerika bipartisan, sie ist parteiübergreifend und da kommen die Leute, die moralische Bedenken haben, nicht dagegen durch.
Wat was de aanslag van 11 september 2001 behalve een aanslag? Was het ook die allesomverrichtende dreiging waar de conservatieven op zaten te wachten? Omdat het een nieuwe, agressieve Amerikaanse politiek zou mogelijk maken. In Amerika is er nu een draagvlak voor een oorlog in Irak en een oorlog in Afghanistan. En dreigende woorden tegen Syrië, Iran en Korea.
We do not fight against Islam. We fight against evil.
March 13th, 1962. Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presents a proposal to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, named Operation Northwoods. The document proposed staging terrorist attacks in and around Guantanamo Bay to provide a pretext for military intervention in Cuba. The plans included starting rumors about Cuba using clandestine radio, landing friendly Cubans inside the base to stage attacks, starting riots at the main gate, blowing up ammunition inside the base, starting fires, sabotaging aircraft and ships on the base, bombing the base with mortar shells, sinking a ship outside the entrance, staging funerals for mock victims, staging a terror campaign in Miami, Florida and Washington, D.C., and finally, destroying a drone aircraft over Cuban waters. The passengers, federal agents in reality, would allegedly be college students on vacation. A plane at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as a duplicate of a registered civil aircraft belonging to a CIA front in Miami. The duplicate would be substituted for the real plane and loaded with the passengers. The real plane would be converted into a drone. The two planes would rendezvous south of Florida. The passenger-laden plane would land at Eglin Air Force Base to evacuate its passengers and return to its original status. The drone would pick up the scheduled flight plan and, over Cuban waters, transmit a Mayday signal before being blown up by remote control. The plan is rejected by McNamara, and President John F. Kennedy personally removes Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. December 1st, 1984. A remote-controlled Boeing 720 takes off from Edwards Air Force Base and is crash-landed by NASA for fuel research. Before its destruction, the plane flew a total of 16 hours and 22 minutes, including 10 takeoffs, 69 approaches, and 13 landings. August 1997. The cover of FEMA's Emergency Response to Terrorism depicts the World Trade Center in crosshairs. February 28th, 1998. The Global Hawk, Raytheon's unmanned aircraft vehicle, completes its first flight over Edwards Air Force Base in California, at an altitude of 32,000 feet, cruising altitude for a commercial jetliner. 1999. NORAD begins conducting exercises in which hijacked airliners are flown into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. June 2000. The Department of Justice releases a terrorism manual with the World Trade Center in crosshairs. September 2000. The Project for a New American Century, a neo-conservative think tank whose members include Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Jeb Bush, and Paul Wolfowitz, releases their report entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. In it, they declare that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
For 38 years, as of November 22nd, just a few days ago, we have had a videotape showing clearly that John F. Kennedy was shot from the front and not the back, where the Warren Commission says that Lee Harvey Oswald was, up and behind to the right in the Texas School Book Depository. You look at this tape, and there is clear, convincing, incontrovertible evidence. Yet what good has it done us? What has it done to change the government? What has it done? What have we, meaning the American people, accomplished with this piece of video that shows his head moving backwards as a result of a bullet impact from the front of his head? It hasn't changed anything.
There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
To do with liberal versus conservative, or Democrat versus Republican, or right versus left. It has everything to do with right versus wrong.
Terrible pilot.
How was the war on terror won?
America was targeted for attack.
Investigate this act.
The lie, wrote theologian Andre Dumas, is biblically portrayed as the first and most poisonous source of injustice. Truth-telling, he wrote, is absolutely essential to the very life and health of the whole community. How could it be that no U.S. Air Force jet interceptors turned a wheel on September the 11th until it was too late? 11th will clear the way for petroleum pipelines of huge interest to the White House, immediately following the planes slamming into the World Trade Center. These marked up passages are from my dog-eared copy of a gem of a book, The Idea of Disarmament, Rethinking the Unthinkable, by Alan Geyer. Geyer, in 1982, writes, "The nuclear arms race has become this generation's severest test of truth. It is zealously promoted with false words, deceptive jargon, pretentious dogmatics, hateful propaganda, and arbitrary bars on access to the truth. No realm of public policy is more corrupted by untruthful speech than national security. Today, the big lie of the so-called war on terrorism, itself firmly based on the linchpin of the implausible official version of what happened on September 11th, is an even more severe test of truth, in my opinion. Under the banner of the war on terrorism, George W. Bush, with the aid of the media, zealously promotes perpetual global war in service of resource looting and permanent popularity for himself. There's unprecedented militarism. The USA is spending more than half its budget on wars past, present, and future, according to the Center for Defense Information. As Christian humanist Geyer writes, in words truer today, in my view, than when written, demythologizing has become the indispensable theological tool of peacemaking. It is the operation empowering the people of God to understand the stratagems by which inhuman speech violates the Word of God. Those stratagems include a relentless outpouring of myths about weapons, strategy, security, enemies, history, and human nature, from government bureaucracies and adjunct think tanks and co-opted media and electronic theologians. And in this gem of a book, I find the perfect conclusion to this series about what really happened on September 11th, about the Great Deception, about moral and spiritual challenges amidst fear and denial. In the 1930s, there was a powerful peace movement. At that time, a play by Viennese poet Stefan Zweig was produced. The play's principal character, Jeremiah, bursts forth with these words: "Peace is not a thing of weakness. It calls for heroism and action. Day by day you must wrest it from the mouths of liars. You must stand alone against the multitude, for clamor is always on the side of the many, and the liar has ever the first word. The meek must be strong."
Also appears in Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 9/11. No one claims this footage is doctored. The president continues reading a story about a pet goat for at least 7 minutes. One columnist absurdly suggests that the president doesn't want to alarm the children. But could the president not have said, "Kids, I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself. There's some important business I have to attend to. You just carry on with your reading, you hear?" Any reasonable analysis suggests that the president and his handlers share sufficient real-time and prior knowledge of the unprecedented events of that day. The public record shows the president and his associates fail to act appropriately, that they in fact create a fiction and play act their assigned roles. This evidence alone constitutes grounds for proceeding with an indictment on charges of conspiracy to commit treason. But if, let's be dogged here, if the official story is true, and an astoundingly successful sneak attack from diabolical Muslims caught America totally off guard, then the White House surely must be highly motivated to turn heaven and earth, to use one of their own favorite cliches, to investigate the events of that day as quickly and thoroughly as possible. The White House must rush to appoint a respected chairman and commissioners, give them the widest powers to call witnesses, spare no expense. Except for the Reichstag fire, that's how it's usually done. 6 days after the sinking of the Titanic, a chairman is appointed to head an investigation. 9 days after Pearl Harbor, the first of 4 investigative commissions is struck. The JFK assassination, the Challenger disaster, 7 days each. How many days after 9/11 is it that President Bush names someone to head an investigation?
This commission has been charged with a crucial task.
Call it foot dragging. And then, who does Bush appoint? He appoints Henry Kissinger. Naming Kissinger sets a new standard for cynicism, or for being out of touch, or both. A New York Times editorial suggests the choice was to contain an investigation the White House long opposed. But Kissinger at least is an expert on the date September 11th. It was on that day in 1973 that the CIA-assisted overthrow of the democratically elected government of Chile takes place, masterminded by Kissinger for Richard Nixon. President Salvador Allende is murdered. In his 2001 book, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, Christopher Hitchens notes Kissinger as a crucial figure at all stages of this crime and cover-up. Now, this is in reference to a bloody and unnecessary Kissinger-driven episode in Indochina, which cost the lives of 64 U.S. servicemen. But it also sums up Kissinger's role in the bloody Chilean operation. The cover-up is as important as the crime. The White House tries to install Kissinger, an expert at cover-ups, to head the 9/11 investigation. After a universal backlash, Kissinger backs off. Bush then names, it's 431 days now, Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton as co-chairmen. Kean's Azerbaijan oil connections and other conflicts of interest should make him ineligible from the outset. He earlier co-chairs the Homeland Security Project. Observers have noted that huge profits are to be made in the surveillance and security industries these days. The more alarmed the public, the bigger the profits.
If you live in the real world, you can't do without oil. We use its byproducts every day. But the easy oil has long since been found, and now oil companies must scour the ends of the earth to uncover new sources. Environmentally, the stakes are getting higher. Nowhere is off limits. Opposition from environmental groups is growing, but so is the world's hunger for energy. We need the oil, but how far will we go to get it?
Peak oil is a theory that goes like this. The global production of oil will hit its peak and then start to decline. Now, it doesn't mean the world will run out of oil, but it means is that the world will run out of cheap oil. The idea has been around since the mid-50s. Back then, a Shell oil geologist named Marion King Hubbard predicted that U.S. oil production could hit its peak in the early 1970s. Well, remember that oil shock back in the 70s? It's nothing compared to what supporters of the peak oil concept think we're in for once the decline starts. Economic collapse, geopolitical conflict, and the end of your lifestyle as you know it. Here's why. The U.S. consumes about a quarter of the world's oil production. It's used for everything from transporting food to manufacturing DVDs. But demand in China and India is increasing. I mean, they do account for 1/3 of the world's population. So if China's consumption rate holds, then by about 2030, it'll guzzle as much oil as the U.S. does today. Factor in the rest of the planet and their growth and their needs, and what you've got is increasing demand and shrinking supply of a finite resource. OPEC is the source of about 40% of the world's oil, and while it doesn't set the price, it does determine how much gets produced, and that more or less determines the cost. And the price per barrel is getting higher. The record so far, about $58 US. Both the IMF and the CIBC have warned of $100 barrels. One of the world's leading energy analysts says that could happen in the next 3 years. As for a date when we could hit peak oil, well, that's hotly debated and hard to determine, but depending on who you talk to, it could happen sometime between the next year and 2020.
Unanswered question number 6. Were there plans for a war in Central Asia prior to September 11th?
This war was coming for a long time. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, but who also worked in intelligence roles for Presidents Reagan and Bush 1, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He wrote a book in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. And at 3 specific places in that book, he says the key to America's control of the world in the 21st century is the control of Eurasia.
In support of his thesis, Brzezinski states, a power that dominates Eurasia would control 2 of the world's 3 most advanced and economically productive regions, and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources.
And then he says that without an attack on the order of Pearl Harbor, or without a direct external threat, there was no way that the American people would support the imperial mobilization necessary to control Central Asia. And in this book, again, written in 1997, Brzezinski had a map of where the next world conflict was going to be. And you look at this map in the book, and it's exactly where we're fighting now.
Unanswered question number 7. Is there an underlying motive, besides the war on terror, for the U.S. military presence in Central Asia? Peter Dale Scott has written extensively about hidden agendas in U.S. foreign policy.
There are people in the administration who believe out and out that this is the American century, that it is the time for American hegemony. Both Republicans and Democrats have said we shouldn't worry so much about what our allies think.
Despite a lack of support from America's traditional allies, the Bush administration continues to pursue military action in Central Asia.
But it's, I think, pretty clear now to everybody that America has a oil geostrategy in that part of the world.
The U.S. National Energy Policy Report of 2001, authored by Vice President Dick Cheney, formerly one of America's richest and most powerful oil industry executives, demanded a priority on easing U.S. access to Persian Gulf oil supplies.
America needs to control the world oil system. And the fact that we have put U.S. troops in Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even in Kyrgyzstan, 200 miles from the West Chinese border, all those troops there are nominally in the name of fighting the terrorists, but in reality they have established an American presence in the great oil basin of the Caspian, and people more and more admitting that America is a serious player in that area now because of the troops we put in.
On October 6, 2002, the UK Observer reported, the Bush administration, intimately entwined with the global oil industry, is keen to pounce on Iraq's massive untapped oil reserves, the second biggest in the world after Saudi Arabia's.
Another reason is drug money. Afghanistan had been the largest producer of the opium poppy in the world. And in January of 2001, the Taliban destroyed their entire opium crop, some 4,000 metric tons of the opium poppy. That took what could be up to $200 billion in liquid cash out of the world banking system. Carl Jung said, the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering.
it's time to bite the bullet and ask the tough questions, because it's not too difficult now to look and see what's ahead of us and to know that it's not very pretty.
Brzezinski, who was a Democrat, said that it's time to demonstrate to the Europeans that they're our friends, but we don't rely on them. I think that that's a path for disaster. America needs to control the world oil system. Through OPEC, America has secured that all OPEC oil will be paid for in dollars, even if it's Japan buying from Indonesia. So this creates the world demand for dollars that prevents us from having hyperinflation, even though we go on printing these little green pieces of paper, and we don't export very much ourselves. In fact, we import a great deal more than we export. It's the oil economy of the world that maintains the stability of the dollar, and that's why people are watching the dollar very closely. It's been declining a bit. Some pessimists have been saying it could decline a lot more, and this is where I think America feels that its commitment of force in the rest of the world is a way of maintaining the credibility of the dollar, and oil is the secret there. Everybody has to go on paying for their oil with dollars if the dollar is to continue to be a serious currency.